you are famously one of the four horsemen of the new atheist movement, or whatever that's supposed to be called. And so you're a thoughtful and serious critic of organized religion, but you don't think all organized religions are the same. So why don't we sort of start there, and just why don't you just walk me through about what distinctions you think are meaningful and important, how you approach this kind of thing, because the general, I think it's fair to say you somewhat subscribe to the opiate of the masses thesis, but not all opiates are equal. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, that's actually an analogy I've explicitly drawn at one point. The term religion is one of these suitcase terms that is misleading if you just talk about it generically, because it's a term like drugs, so we have a vast class of compounds that are all drugs, but that includes aspirin, it includes LSD, it includes heroin, and there's those three things have almost nothing in common um, as to their risks or benefits. Um, Also, it's another term like sports, right? So if you're just going to talk about sports generically, you're not, you can't capture all of the details with respect to risk of injury and the type of shape you have to be in to play them, and whether there's violence entailed by the sport, etc. So you got MMA on one side and golf on the other, and they're very different, and so religion is like that, and it's been taboo to acknowledge that unless you happen to be a diehard adherent of one or another religion, in which case you actually know your religion is very specific, and you believe one thing and not another, and for these reasons and not others. And so the fundamentalist Christian or the Orthodox Jew or the truly conservative devout Muslim tends not to be confused by this, but secular liberals and atheists seem to demand that you talk about all religions as either being equally valuable or equally benign or equally false, and it's just not true. So I'm very interested in the specific consequences of specific ideas, and when you drill down to the level of specificity, you see that yeah, it would be profoundly surprising if we were dealing with a death cult of suicide bombers coming out of the Anglican Communion, and it's not so surprising to find them coming out of the various quarters of the Muslim world.
And you can make distinctions in the Muslim world, like Sufism is not the same thing as Sunnism or Shia, and not all Shias are alike either. The point is, painting with too broad a brush tends to obscure rather than reveal things. So so just to dive deeper, then, you would object to the idea of religion being an organizing principle in any society, though, right? If you had your druthers.
Well, I wouldn't object to the fact that it is a powerful organizing principle, and because it is, and you certainly can point to certain benefits in various contexts of having religion as opposed to not having it. But generally speaking, I would say it's not the best organizing principle we have, and it comes with some very obvious and predictable downsides. And the main one is that if you're going to talk about religion proper, I mean, real, faith-based religion, you're talking almost by definition about dogmatism and its celebration, right? I mean, it's in a religious context that the word dogma is actually a good term. I mean, it's a Catholic term. It's not a pejorative term, but obviously anywhere else outside of religious orthodoxy, we use the term dogma to name a way of thinking, or thinking in one of its failure modes, which is just to accept things on insufficient evidence, even things that are uh, on their face preposterous and divisive and leading people to do extraordinarily dangerous things. And so yeah, I'm I think that where you can find religion providing groups of people, individuals or groups, with powerful organizing principles or powerful reasons to do good things, I think even in those cases, those aren't the best sources of those virtues. Which is to say, you can find better reasons to do good things, and you can find better reasons to solve coordination problems with strangers, such that you can build larger groups of people that cooperate with one another.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back a little bit on this, and you were free to slap me down. But I'm one of those people. I'm a fairly secular Jew, um, uh, but I'm also Chestertonian, and I actually think that uh, dogma is not necessarily a pejorative. I understand that the charge of dogmatic thinking has a context that gets at what you're talking about, but even there, um, you know, my take on dogma is that dogma comes from the Greek. It basically means that which seems good, right? That we sort of take for granted. And I think there are all sorts of places in a free, liberal, secular society, and secular is one of those terms we get from Catholicism too, or from Christianity, um, where you want dogma, right? I mean, I'm dogmatically opposed to rape, to pedophilia. I don't want to hear the arguments necessarily about why I should be opposed to it. I can come up with them. I know a lot of them. But when you're talking about organizing a society at scale, I actually think there is a role for settled questions. We fought a civil war in this country to make us to commit to being dogmatically opposed to slavery. We put it in the Constitution. We said this is a settled question. We're not going to revisit it. And what's so bad about that? What's so bad about stacking up some moral victories, some logical victories, some even religious victories, and just simply say, we're going to put this stuff on a very high shelf so people can't reach it, and we're not going to revisit it because we think this is one of the building blocks of a healthy civilization?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't deny that there's certain ground that we've conquered intellectually and ethically that we shouldn't be too eager to revisit, right? But it's even there can be cases where you want to be able to have an honest and searching conversation about the foundations of your ethics and the foundations of your sense of political justice and fairness, etc. Um, because they're just, again, there are these corner conditions that can reveal that what you thought was settled isn't so settled, and you need to, at minimum, dust it off and reposition it on the shelf, if only to ignore it, for another century or so. Um, I mean, it's just important to recognize what dogmatism is. It's a way of canonizing certain ideas and committing to being behaviorally constrained by them, and an unwillingness to review any counter evidence or counter argument in real time or in the future, so as to modify any of that. So it's by definition to fall out of a mode where error correction, if you are making errors, whether they're physical or psychological or ethical or etc., um, you, you're you lose your purchase on reality testing and error correction, right? So, for instance, and there are many dogmas that which on their face seem totally benign, but which can throw up surprising ethical problems if you're disposed to never rethink them. And then my favorite example of this from recent years, it's not so pressing now because the science has moved on a bit, but when embryonic stem cell research was something that we had invented and seemed extraordinarily promising to produce medical therapy, um, many religious people were opposed to it. And they were opposed to it based on a dogma which, on its face, you would think could never have produced any unintended harm. I mean, this dogma is all human life is sacred, and human life starts at the first possible moment, at the moment of conception. Right now, not all religious people share that view. I mean, interestingly, Muslims don't. But if you were someone who thought, listen, that the safest kind of spiritual and ethical play here is to just honor every permutation of human life as fully as we can honor it, and just do no harm. Like this is the ultimate Hippocratic oath for the species. Well, then everything is sacred from the moment of conception on, if you're talking about human life. What, who's going to get hurt by that, right? Now, leaving abortion aside and women's rights aside, I mean, we knew there were some issues there, but embryonic stem cell research really threw up a glaring ethical error, in my view, here with that sort of thinking. Because if you believe that all human life is sacred and it starts at the moment of conception, then you become a kind of moral lunatic, frankly, who can't distinguish cells in a petri dish from a little girl in a wheelchair or somebody who just suffered full body burns, right? Somebody who needs a spinal cord injury repaired, or somebody who needs skin grafts, or a cure for diabetes that could transform the lives of millions of people, right? So it's you become closed to all of those conversations, which embryonic stem cell research forced upon us, because you have this religious principle, this dogmatic principle that you're not going to rethink. And the problem with dogmatism is you never know when reality is going to throw those examples up. And if you're not flexible enough to continue to be interested in new arguments and new evidence, the conversation stops, and you literally had people. I mean, people who were sitting on the President's Council of Bioethics, or people who were sitting in churches and synagogues, who would say with a straight face that they care just as much about cells, that are so small that if there were 500 on the tip of their finger, they wouldn't be able to see them. They care about just about as much about those people as real people who are suffering, all manner of biological bad luck.
So, I mean, maybe we have a bit of a definite. I can get into some of the abortion stuff. I'm personally somewhere closer to you on some of that, but I've also surrounded myself for a quarter century with pro-lifers, and one of the points pro-lifers will make, that I will make, is that you don't want the state involved in the business of deciding who's a human being and who's not. And so you have to err on the side one way or another, because which gets, I don't really want to debate embryonic stem cell research, but the point is that there are trade-offs in all of these things. And so while I agree with you that, look, I mean, it used to be dogma that slavery was okay, right? And then you build up enough problems that stem from it, some morally obvious, or I wish they were obvious, because slavery is a very old institution around the world. But eventually the case against slavery outweighed the case for it, and we got rid of it. It still exists elsewhere in the world, but that's a different topic. My point is not that dogma can never be overturned. It's sort of like Chesterton's fence, right? You have to know why you have the dogma in the first place before you can tear it down. And I
It's
see
a
a lot
shortcut.
of,
I mean, it's a heuristic. I'll totally grant you that. I mean, you said the word trade-off, which is crucial here. I mean, we only have so much time. We only have so much bandwidth. Everything represents an opportunity cost. So yes, if we're going to revisit the ethics of slavery for whatever perverse reason, um, at what sacrifice, and is it really worth our time? And I'll grant you that I think you and I, our intuitions will converge on many of those cases, except you do have to have as your source code a a bias toward reality testing and openness to evidence and argument. I mean, the slavery thing will come back to us possibly in the AI debate. At a certain point, you're going to have a roboticist who says, "Listen, this is a independent agent who I think is probably conscious, and now you're treating it like a slave. We have to talk about robot rights." And so, it's even that debate is probably not gone on some level.